All right. So Karina, are we live now?
We are live. I am promoting Brooke to a panelist.
And does it look like we have the majority of the folks that have signed up?
No, we have 4 attendees so far.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just wait another minute or two, and then we'll get started.
We're up to 9.
Perfect.
And we've reached 10. I don't see anyone else joining.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started now. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the City of Reno's webinar today and workshop on the tree protection ordinance. Since you're here today, you're aware that the City of Reno is going through a process to update its standards related to tree protection. We did some direct outreach and some general outreach to try to encourage folks to attend today. We do expect a lot of our participants in the webinar today will be from the landscaping community, as well as others who have kind of shared the word with their colleagues. And what the City of Reno is doing right now in terms of outreach and opportunities, we have a series of neighborhood advisory board meetings that we will be attending in the coming weeks, as well as workshops. And all of the input opportunities are available on the website at reno.gov/trees. And I'm going to go ahead and get started on the presentation today. We have a presentation that's scheduled for about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll go through that, go through some of the details of the changes that were proposed by the Urban Forestry Commission. And at that point, then we'll open it up to questions and comments from the attendees in our workshop today. So thank you again for being here with us. So in the discussion and what we'll cover in the presentation today, we will provide kind of an overview of the project itself, talk about the purpose behind those changes that are being proposed, summarize key items that are proposed in the draft ordinance, talk a little bit about the timeline for the process, identify those opportunities for involvement from the community or for stakeholders, and then get to what we think will probably be the biggest chunk of our discussion today, which is about input and questions. And again, you can learn more about the project and read the draft ordinances, submit comments online, subscribe to updates at reno.gov/trees. So this first slide, a lot of information, not going to go through it. This is really just to provide an overview of the policies that the City of Reno has adopted related to tree protection, to growing our tree canopy, and to ensure that our green infrastructure in the city is as healthy and thriving as possible. We have a number of policies adopted in the Reimagine Reno Master Plan, in our sustainability plan, and in the urban forestry management plan that all speak to protecting and growing our urban canopy. And a lot of what this ordinance is an attempt to implement those policies that have been adopted. So this slide just kind of summarizes at a very high level some of our existing standards related to tree protection and tree installation. I think most of you, of course, are going to be aware that landscaping is generally required for new development. What that looks like, what's required, will be based on the use that's being proposed. But generally, it's going to include things like standards for species of vegetation required to be put in, soil requirements, irrigation, planting size, that kind of thing. We do have a requirement that existing trees be inventoried, that be provided on certain types of permit applications. And then when it comes to requests to remove trees, we have mitigation requirements in place right now for trees that are located in the front yard and in rights of way. Certainly landscaping that is required to be put in must also be maintained. There are potential penalties if it is not maintained. And then of course, public trees. Those trees that are owned by the City of Reno are in public rights of way, in public spaces. Of course, those are more heavily protected. Permits currently are needed to maintain or to remove those, potentially also requiring replacement or an in lieu fee when they are removed. So the City of Reno Tree Protection Ordinance, what are we trying to get at with that? What are the issues? What are we trying to address? What you'll see on the screen is just a list of some of the concerns that have been identified that have led to some of the changes that you will see in the proposed ordinance, things that we're trying to mitigate. And first one of those is concerns about landscaping that has been required that is being removed or damaged. For example, topping trees and doing that outside of the permit process. Another issue that we actually see come up with a higher frequency is landscaping that is not necessarily being installed according to the plans or the standards. So, whatever the landscaping plan that was approved, that the landscaping on the ground is not always necessarily getting it installed according to those approved plans. And of course, that's something that can reduce that likelihood of long-term survival and thriving for those trees. Right now, another issue that has been brought up as an issue of concern is that our tree protection standards, the city's tree protection standards, only apply to trees located in the front yard or to street trees, and only during the construction process, so during a permitting process. We have heard input from the community and concerns about there being uncertainty in the thresholds at which tree protection standards apply, how trees are appraised and valued, who has maintenance responsibility, especially when it comes to right-of-way trees, street trees, and penalties for not adhering to the standards. And of course, I think one of the issues that jurisdictions across the state, across the country are dealing with, limited resources for actually being able to enforce and implement the codes and standards in place. So what we'd like to provide now is kind of get into the changes that were proposed by the Reno Urban Forestry Commission. And just to give you a little bit of additional context and history, back in July, the City Council did initiate the tree protection ordinance and essentially authorized for a code amendment to move forward with that. And part of their direction was for the initial draft to go through the Reno Urban Forestry Commission before it went out to the public. So staff did an initial draft and then brought it to the Urban Forestry Commission. And we spent about 6 workshops actually working through the details, all the language and text in that initial draft. What you see now that is posted on the website, the draft that's for review, incorporates all those changes from the Reno Urban Forestry Commission. So those meetings happened between September and December, and they impact changes to Chapter 832 and Title 18. Chapter 832 is where you're going to see standards related primarily to public trees, so trees that are in the right-of-way, that are in parkways, trees in other public spaces, and then also some standards related to private trees that have been deemed a nuisance. Most of the changes in that chapter primarily could be considered clarifications on standards and responsibilities. There are some new sections on appraisal methods and financial assurances being required under certain circumstances. Also, some enhancements to existing standards. Title 18 is where you're going to see a good chunk of changes as well. And for those who may not be aware, Title 18 is where you will find standards for development, new development that comes in. Usually we'll have to go to Title 18 to see, what is it exactly that is required when you are developing a piece of property, and that includes our landscaping code. There you're going to see an expansion of the tree protection standards on private property in that new draft. And then there's also numerous clarifications and attempts to streamline some of our procedures. So what I'm going to do right now is just go through some of the key changes that you will see in that current draft for Chapter 832. Again, 8.32 relates back primarily to public trees and nuisance private trees. So in that article, you will find an enhanced purpose section, new definitions that were added to provide clarity. There's a new option to designate private landmark trees. Our existing code already has a section allowing for designation of public landmark trees. So there's a new section that would allow for private landmark trees to be designated as well as creating incentives for doing so. And then also a section that, or I should say throughout this chapter 832, where we try to clarify some of those maintenance responsibilities when there is a property owner that is abutting a tree that is in the right of way, and who has those maintenance responsibilities. Is it the abutting property owner? Is it an HOA? Is it the urban forester? And part of that just goes down to what the maintenance actions are that we're talking about. So there's clarification added in 832 for that. Also codifying the process for when there is a property owner who wishes to remove a tree that abuts their property, one that's in the right of way, and that tree is not currently scheduled for removal. So establishing a process to deal with that scenario. And then again, a new section on public tree appraisals, and also offering a new simplified appraisal method option for those who don't necessarily want to go through the full detailed appraisal. So this is the second page where we'll talk through the rest of those changes in 8.32. There's a lot of clarification related to permitting and procedures when the urban forester is reviewing a permit, how to submit the permit, what the review timelines are, and the activities that do or do not require a permit through the urban forestry team. There's also a new provision in that current draft that requires financial assurances from the applicant, from the property owner, if they are doing some sort of construction where they are unable to adequately protect an existing public tree, or financial assurances would need to be provided in that scenario. One of the things you'll also see is the removal of the section currently on prohibited trees, and the reason for that is that it's being moved out of there because that information is available in the city's standard details. And then consolidating some sections for clarity as well. So that at a high level, that covers the changes in 832. Now we'll go ahead and talk about some of the changes in Title 18. I think the biggest change that will likely be noted is just a large overhaul of the city's existing tree protection standards. And what that looks like is expanded applicability across private property for those standards. So right now, again, tree protection standards are only applicable in the current code, only applicable to trees that are located in the front yard or in the right of way. And so with that new draft, it would expand that. So the protection standards would be applied across the property and to all activities, meaning not just when construction is occurring on a property, not just during the permitting process, but for any activity that may potentially negatively impact trees on site. These standards would apply based on the current draft to all non-residential, mixed-use, multifamily, and common open space developments. There would be exemptions as proposed in the current draft, would exempt single-family homes, activities for defensible space, and then when there's an imminent safety issue, and a specific threshold built in as well in terms of tree size. So trees that are 2 inches diameter or larger would be subject to those tree protection standards, or if they are one of the prohibited species, if that tree is 4 inches or larger. Also, what you'll see in the current draft is a larger focus on actually trying to incentivize preserving existing trees and increasing the mitigation required when trees are removed, when private protected trees are removed. So when we talk about incentives for trying to get folks to preserve existing trees, the process for that has changed, at least in this proposed draft. So what you'll see in the current code is that preserving trees on site, that our code would allow for up to a 30% credit. In other words, if you preserve a certain number of trees on site, that would allow for your new required landscaping up to 30% credit against that new required landscaping. So what the proposed incentives are is that it's kind of a sliding scale based on the size of the tree. If it is a tree over 6 inches in diameter, preserving one tree would provide a credit of 3 trees towards the new landscaping requirements. For those trees that are slightly smaller, 2 to 6 inches in size, preserving one tree would offer a credit of 2 trees towards the new landscaping requirements. And then that credit could account for up to 50% of the required on-site trees. So that's some of the changes just in terms of trying to incentivize preservation of trees. Now we'll talk a little bit about mitigation if trees are removed. And in the current draft, you will see a distinction. This is a new distinction between species that are on the prohibited species list versus other protected trees. And I do just want to note, this has been a topic of conversation when we talk about prohibited species trees. That's a phrase that's kind of out of our existing code. We do fully expect that kind of the naming, the nomenclature for that list, prohibited species list, that will change through the process. So I just want to note that up front. But when I'm talking about prohibited species, it's going back to that current list of species that are less desirable in the city. So if it is a prohibited species tree that is more than 4 inches in diameter, essentially removal of those trees would require replacement at a 50% ratio. For example, if 2 4-inch prohibited species trees were removed, that would require replacement with 1 non-prohibited species tree. For other protected trees, other protected private property trees, the Reno Urban Forestry Commission's recommendation was to replace those on a 1-to-1 ratio based on the caliper inches of the trees removed. So for example, if you had an existing 6-inch caliper tree that was removed, that it would need to be replaced again on an inch per inch basis. So for example, removing that 6-inch tree would require replacement with 2 3-inch caliper trees or equivalent. So that could potentially also be, 3 2-inch trees, that kind of thing. And again, with our current code, we have a requirement for 30% replacement. So this is a pretty significant change. A new option built in is to actually provide alternatives. If the applicant is unable to replant those replacement trees on site, then they have a couple of additional options that were not available previously with that proposed code. So one option would be to plant those replacement trees on public property, or another alternative would be to pay an in lieu fee to the Relief Reno Fund that was based on that tree's appraised value, or potentially any combination of the above mitigation options. And another new section in Title 18 is a new procedure, and that would be, if there are activities that would potentially impact protected trees or impact required landscaping, and this is activities that would occur outside of the permitting process, not necessarily associated with construction or grading, then a landscape permit would be required just to make sure that the appropriate tree protection plans are being submitted and that the mitigation and credits are being applied appropriately as well. And then also a new option for modification of standards when there are extraordinary specific circumstances where there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of how those standards are applied. The new draft also includes some updated requirements for parking lot trees and the associated soil requirements. Also some updated sizing requirements for new street trees that are planted, where a minimum of 75% of them would need to be class 3 or 4. And then requiring newly planted trees to meet the city's soil quality and soil volume standard details. Other changes, just kind of apart from what you'll see within the Title 18 language, relate back to process and procedure. There is a pretty significant effort behind the scenes, apart from the code language, where we're looking at ways to really streamline processes and permitting, especially when it comes to tree permits, getting something like that into our permitting system so it's a little bit more trackable. And then moving some items out of code and into the standard details where possible. That's something that we expect would be able to assist not just staff in the review, but also applicants being able to standardize those across applications. And then another, I think, very critical piece of this is starting to conduct inspections for required landscaping. That is something that, of course, would require additional resources as well. So as part of the proposal, we would be requesting resources to be able to make that happen. So that kind of covers the specifics of changes in the Reno Urban Forestry Commission's draft. And what I'm going to talk about now is just kind of a timeline of going through the process. You know, back in June, we initially went to the Urban Forestry Commission and presented some of the concepts and options at a higher level before we even had a code language available to review. Back in July, that's when council initiated the code amendment. In August, staff spent that time drafting the initial code language. And again, back in a series of 6 workshops, September through December, is when Urban Forestry Commission provided some policy direction and changes that you see in that current draft. Right now in the highlighted section, throughout January, we're holding a series of public workshops, neighborhood advisory board meetings, open houses, where we really want to get that input from the community, hear from our stakeholders, understand all of the different perspectives, and then update the language in the proposed draft as a result of the conversations that we have with the community. And then take that draft back to the Urban Forestry Commission in either February or March for their official review and recommendation before going to Planning Commission for their recommendation. And then we're looking in late spring to bring it to City Council for a final decision. So this list up here is a list of just some, not all, of the stakeholders that we know have interest in this project. And I have this up on the screen just because we want to reiterate, we totally understand there are so many different perspectives, so many different values, you know, so many different ways of looking at the proposed language. And we want to understand what is important to each of the different stakeholders and stakeholder groups. So whether or not that's talking with, you know, many of who we'll see here today, local landscape architects, arborists, others in the landscaping community, whether it's developers, business owners, private property owners, you know, certainly the folks from the City of Reno and the many different departments tasked with actually implementing adopted codes, other government agencies, other interested parties, and then of course those decision-making bodies part of the process as well. So what you'll see on the screen now are a list of upcoming opportunities for input. Again, neighborhood advisory boards and workshops. We will have updates to, you know, whenever there's any changes to any times or locations or anything else related to the input opportunities. Those will be posted on reno.gov/trees. You'll also see options for registering for future workshops there. And again, you can also view the draft language, subscribe to updates, and submit comments from that website as well. So we are now at the place where I am going to stop talking, and I hope to hear from all of you. We are in a webinar format today, just based on the number of folks that we had signed up. So we're going to ask that if you have a question or a comment today, if you are dialing in via Zoom, to please click the little raise hand button in the webinar controls. If you're on the phone, to dial *9, and then the host will get notification that you'd like to speak. They'll call on you, they'll ask you to unmute. You know, you had to click the little unmute button in the controls, but if you're on the phone, you would dial *6 to unmute. And we're expecting they'll probably need to do a few rounds of comments. We want to make sure that we're able to hear from everyone today. So if you could please, on the first round, at least limit comments to 2-3 minutes. And then if you have additional comments, you know, like I said, we'll be doing multiple rounds is what we expect. And so if you have additional comments, to please just raise your hand again and put you in the queue. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. And then I'm also going to ask, I see our Parks Director, Jamie, if there's anything that before we move into that public input side that she wants to note for the audience as well.
Sure, yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Jamie Schroeder, Director of Parks and Recreation. Thank you very much for attending this workshop. We are looking forward to getting everyone's input. But before we dive into input and questions, I just wanted to let the group know that we have 15 attendees, to include Councilmember Naomi Doerr and the Urban Forestry Commission Chair, Cynthia Albright. And as Kelly has explained, go ahead and raise your hand. As the hands get raised, what I will do is I will call on the next person to speak, and then I will say followed by, just so that you know that you will be up next, and that way we can hopefully keep the process moving along smoothly. So with that, we have so far just one hand raised. And so Karina, if you could move Carrie Jensen over, and then we will follow that with Mark Chappelle.
Okay, Carrie, you should have the ability to speak now.
Hi, thanks. I just had a question on the caliper or size of new trees that are required for a new development. I wasn't quite sure what the previous size was and what the new sizes are that are proposed.
Carrie, thank you for the question for that. And just to be clear that the proposed sizes for installation requirements, that's not proposing to be changed with this update.
Okay, so it's just for trees that are being replaced.
Correct.
And did I
Correct.
understand right that those are going to be larger tree tree sizes required?
I'm going to go back to that slide really quickly. And you're talking about for the replacement, not for the credit, correct?
I think so. There was somewhere where it said like class 3 and 4 trees.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Okay. So for the street trees, yes, class 3 and 4 species trees. And then in terms of sizing, I apologize. I don't remember if it's 2 inches or 2.5 inches caliper for deciduous that's required for new trees being planted. Generally speaking, for evergreens, minimum is 6 inches, but when it comes to those classes, it goes back to the species. And that's something that actually, just to be able to answer that a little bit more fully, we've got our urban forester, Matt Basil, on the line. And I'm going to ask if he can just speak to that very briefly.
Hi, Carrie. So is the question specifically the type of trees that we're replacing, or the diameter of the actual replacement tree itself?
The size. I guess where I'm coming from is just in general, my understanding is when you plant trees that are in smaller diameter, smaller trees, they have more time to grow and accommodate or acclimate to the current conditions, right? And get stronger root systems and everything. So my concern was just if you're requiring really big caliper trees to go in, that they are going to be super stressed and have difficulty in acclimating. So I just
No, the caliper requirement for the trees is going to remain the same at 2 inches caliper. We're not increasing the initial planting size of the trees. We've explored using even smaller trees based on your suggestion that the smaller trees settle in better. We do find that once you go too small, then they're more susceptible to vandalism, and they create more issues with sight lines and things like that. So we think that 2 inches is a good place for the minimum caliper of new trees.
Okay, that answers my question. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that had been considered.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, we'll go to Mark Chappelle, followed by Daniel, and I really apologize if I mess up your name, Inui.
Okay, Mark, you should have the ability to speak now.
Thank you, Karina. I had two questions. One, perhaps Jamie could answer, and that is this bit of new information about having perhaps a targeted location for planting trees in lieu of having them on site. I didn't know if the Parks Department was going to go through the process of identifying target sites for receiving those trees. And then the other question was in regards to the Public Works Design Manual. They were going through an update last year, and then it got put on hold because of COVID. And I didn't know if there was an update as to when the next Public Works Design update was going to be. Is it going to be on the same track? Is it going to be fall of this year? Is it on permanent hiatus? Because it relates to issues that Matt had brought up at the Reno Urban Forestry Commission about tree volume or tree soil volume that's going to be reflected in the Public Works Design Manual. So those are the two questions I had.
Thanks. I'll let Matt actually answer both of them.
Okay, as far as the timeline for the Public Works Design Manual, I don't know if they've delayed that further or not. I am working with Public Works on updating the specifications and details for their manual. But I know they've lost a few people in their department, so they've, at least as of late, every time I've been dealing with them, they're pretty backed up. So I would anticipate probably some delays with that. And then sorry, Mark, what was the other?
Well, in regards to one of the things that Kelly brought up in her presentation was that there's the possibility of having targeted locations for trees that aren't being, if you can't accommodate the trees on site.
So we do have within our tree inventory, I do have vacant sites located in all of our parks and different open space areas where we can plant trees. We also have priority planting areas, which are basically areas that we've identified as being economically vulnerable and also urban heat island effect and low canopy. So those are areas where we would like to plant more trees. They're higher priority tree planting areas, which would be our first choice for replacement trees to go.
And would that also include the tree volume requirement? If you're going to be putting in new trees on city property, would that have to be over excavated and comply with the Public Works Design Manual tree volume standards?
So that's, yes, but that's the way that you phrase the question is with the over excavation. I think in general, if the soil volume around the tree already meets the soil quality specifications and is irrigated, then it doesn't require any extra over excavation. The over excavation is required when there's, if there is no acceptable soil adjacent to the tree. So for example, if a sidewalk was removed and you're creating a parkway, there's base and road base material and things like that does need to be removed and replaced with an acceptable soil that meets our soil specification. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
And I just want to tag on really quickly to Mark's question about the timing for the design manual. Just in recent conversations that I've had with Public Works, they are still working through that process. My understanding is that they're scheduled for sometime more likely in the fall. So it's kind of working on a parallel track, but slightly beyond what our timeframe for this project will be.
Thank you. We have Daniel up next, and then Carrie, your hand is still raised. So I don't know if that meant you had a second question, or if you're good to go, you can just go ahead and lower your hand. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. This is Daniel. I'm with the Washoe County Health District Air Quality Management Division. Just wanted to give a good shout out to Kelly and her group, and as well as the Urban Forestry Commission for putting this strong effort into really making the tree protection ordinance a good product here. We appreciate the fact that Reno does have an urban forester and also targets for tree canopy. Our comments are going to be more related to urban heat island and air quality impacts because they go hand in hand. There's a direct relationship between urban heat island and air pollution levels, especially ozone. We strongly support the recommendation to address soil volume. That's, I think, the best way to give the trees a chance to grow up to their full potential. Had some comments on the mitigation ratios. And this goes back to Reno's goal of 10% canopy by 2036. We feel that the mitigation ratio should be more aggressive, maybe 3 to 1 or more on the planting and on the funding for Relief Reno. And then also parking areas. Parking areas can be little mini urban heat islands, and we'd like to see something to address canopy coverage. A way to address that could be to have fewer parking spaces between trees or shorter distances to from a parking stall to a tree. On the hot summer days in the parking lots, with a few trees, you see all the cars huddled around those trees, and it's really a benefit to the community directly for air quality, urban heat island, stormwater runoff, temperature, intensity. So there's many co-benefits to that. So those were our comments. And Kelly, we'd also like to submit these comments in writing. What would be the best way to do that?
Daniel, thank you so much for that question. Please go ahead and use the reno.gov/trees website. And on that page, you will find an option for submitting comments online. So if you do submit them in writing in that fashion, what happens is that we will include all of those comments. It'll certainly be consolidated in one place and will allow us to provide those to the decision-making body. So we'd ask that if you have written comments to submit, to please do that there.
Okay, would that be directly into that, or would attachments be available to include in there?
We do not currently have an option for attachments, although I love that question, and I will see if that is something that we could add. But in the meantime, if you could just put those in text format into those boxes in the form. There's not a limit on the characters, so you can put in as much information as you like. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and we are back to Carrie Jensen.
Thanks. I just had one more question. I just wanted to know if there's any change to protections of riparian trees in the corridor along the river, or mitigation requirements for any that are removed.
Carrie, thank you for the question on that. So we have a minor change in the draft that you will see in the section. It's at the very beginning of the draft PDF document under wetlands and stream protection, where what we tried to do there, was just kind of mention trees and native stands of trees specifically in the existing code. It already talks about riparian vegetation, but we wanted to make sure to get that language in there. So not proposing specific changes to the standards. There's actually a whole separate manual when it comes to impacting significant hydrologic resources and the vegetation surrounding them. But we did try to just make sure that that language is specifically included for more for trees and for native stands of trees.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you.
Up next is Kelly Dufresne, followed by Mark Chappelle.
Kelly, you should have the ability to speak now.
Kelly, you may need to try mute and unmute a couple of times to see if we can't get that to work. If not, we'll put you back in the queue and come back to you. All right, let's go to Mark, and we'll come back to Kelly after Mark's question.
Alrighty.
Okay, Mark, it looks like you should have the ability to speak, but you are muted.
There we go. I wanted to follow up. One of the previous commenters mentioned that the target canopy cover was 10% by the year 2036. The Reno Relief website indicates that current Reno coverage is 5.2%, and that was based on a 2011-2012 study done by the Nevada Department of Forestry. We looked into data sets, GIS data sets, to see if we could proof that number. It is cost prohibitive. I don't know if the city is going to go back on a 10-year cycle or something like that to keep revisiting what the current canopy is, because the data that this is based on is 10 years old.
Mark, I'm currently working with Nevada Division of Forestry on a grant to update those canopy studies. So we should hopefully have some new numbers relatively soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's give Kelly another shot.
Kelly, another option would be for you to call into the meeting and try to do it from your cell phone. I'm not sure if your computer is having issues. But it looks like you're unmuted. We just can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Hello. Sorry, but we could have barking dogs and all kinds of things here in a minute. So I have a quick question about the tree requirements and the planting when it comes to city projects. Will they be the same if a city is proposing a project, or if compared to like a developer? I would think that the code would apply straight across the board.
And I'm gonna go ahead and let Matt respond to that.
Yes, the intention is that the code applies across the board, and it also applies as far as the specifics are going to be more in the details and the specifications themselves, which will live in public works. But as far as, you know, whether it's a city or a private development, they should adhere to those specifications.
Yeah, my concern is, you know, let's say you have to widen a street somewhere, and say you're doing it, say in the old Southwest, where you're going through, and if you have to, I know that the option is not to remove any of the large trees, right? But say you have to take out some 48-inch caliper elm trees along the side of the street, and you have to take out 30 of them. It's the city going to replace that with the same like number somewhere else, in that it just seems cost prohibitive based on what we know of city budgets and city staff. And so it seems that would be a struggle for the city to complete, and just thought I would bring that up as an option, as something to think about.
Sure.
And Kelly, thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, based on our conversations with Public Works and some of the utility companies here, basically the plan is for, if a tree needs to be removed as part of a maintenance type project, then we'll replace the trees one for one. So if one tree is removed, then one tree will be planted. And that's just for the maintenance of an existing utility or infrastructure item. If there's a new piece of infrastructure being installed or utility, such as a sewer line or something, we would expect the designer to accommodate the tree as part of the construction process there. Or if not, then if they prefer to remove the tree to install the new infrastructure, then they would have to adhere to the code as proposed.
So
they'd have to replace to the 50% requirement that's in the new code.
I'd like to just go ahead and jump in here too on this. There is a section in the current draft related to some of those infrastructure projects that's it's reserved, and there are some details still to be figured out, but we are having conversations about how that should look. It's a little bit separate for those those infrastructure projects, and certainly those that are I guess you could say tied to other public benefits, community benefits. So there's some details related to that that are still in the works, that you're not necessarily going to see all of that in the current language, but that as we move through the process, we expect is going to be fleshed out a little bit further. So I just want to add that context.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, up next we have Noah, followed by Mark, and followed by Daniel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to the proposed changes for the regulation of backyard trees and what that could or would entail?
Certainly. And so one of the things that you will see in the existing draft under the exemption section is a specific exemption for single family homes and lots. So, you know, what you'll see in that current draft is an exclusion of those single family homes from the tree protection standards.
And it's going to apply to then multifamily, I assume, or and commercial or mixed use?
So yeah, I'm just gonna go back on the screen really quick, some of those exemptions and applicability pieces, just so I have them in front of me. Okay, so in terms of applicability, it would apply to non-residential uses and developments, mixed use developments, multifamily, and then common open space areas of subdivisions. So with a specific example, you'll see on the bottom building for those single family homes and lots. And then that is also, you'll see that those exemptions and the applicability in that, I think, first 2 pages of the tree protection standards in that draft language.
Okay, thanks.
Certainly.
Okay, we've got Daniel, then Melinda, and then back to Kelly.
Okay, thank you. The Reno has a recent project going on with the old RGJ building, and there was a situation where the number of trees that were supposed to be planted could not be planted due to various situations. What occurred with that situation as far as trees and mitigation versus what would happen with the proposed rule moving forward?
So that's a good question, and I'm not completely familiar with all of the specifics of that case, except that I know that it was a variance request that had gone through for the Public Safety Center, which is essentially, you know, where the new police station and headquarters would be located. And I know that there were some significant constraints in being able to, I think, meet all of those community safety needs and develop the property to the letter of the code. That is, you know, one of the reasons that the variance was submitted. I know that part of that with landscaping also was related to sight lines and concern about, you know, safety of the facility itself, especially with, you know, some of the activities that we've seen happening locally and across the country, that there were concerns related to that as well. So that was a variance process, and the, you know, variance goes through public hearing where Planning Commission determines whether or not the code standards can be modified, and that request, if I recollect correctly, was approved. And so the existing, or I should say with the, you know, any updates in the tree protection standards, that is another standard, right? It's additional standards in the code. So there's always the possibility that someone could request a variance in the code standards. You know, we have a new section that is in that draft related to a modification of standards under extraordinary specific circumstances. It's only for certain aspects, very specific circumstances. But let's say if a request didn't fall under those specific circumstances, then an applicant could certainly potentially submit a variance application seeking approval from the Planning Commission based on whatever extraordinary circumstances that they believe are applicable to their project. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
It's more of a future or possible scenario question where if the proposed rule was in place at the time that that variance, or at the time that the project was proposed, what would happen? Well, I would think that if there was a variance or landscaping or trees could not be planted, then it would go through that mitigation portion and or relief option.
So go ahead.
If I could just talk a little bit about that specific project.
Oh, great.
Basically what we proposed was to mitigate it based on what's proposed for the new code. So So we're proposing to plant the trees that were not able to be replaced on the property within the priority planting areas that I discussed with one of Mark's questions. So at least as I understand it now, the proposal for the variance included replanting of the required number of trees, but in a priority planting area. I don't know the current status of, if funding for that was approved or not, but that was at least how Public Works proposed the variance to make it possible.
Okay, great, thank you. So basically it was early adopting the proposed language or the concept of it or the spirit of it.
Yes.
This is Brooke Oswald, a planner with City of Reno. I'd like to add one more thing. As the variance comes through and that variance considered at a planning commission or other body, when that is approved, that vests under the code that it was reviewed under. So that variance is subject to the code at the time that it was looked at or was approved.
But because the existing code has no alternative for us to utilize to make to mitigate the loss of the trees, which is really one of the big issues that kind of sparked this whole process. We did propose to use the priority planting area replacement strategy, which is proposed for this new code. And I think that seems to work decently well.
Gotcha, thanks, Matt.
Okay, up next we have Melinda, followed by Kelly, followed by Carrie.
There we go. Hi. Hi. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. First question is whether we would be able to have copies of the slide presentation emailed to us.
So I'll go ahead and check on that. I believe we have email addresses from registration. Karina, is that right?
I believe so.
Okay, and so we'll attempt to go ahead and email that out, but we are also planning on putting this information onto that reno.gov/trees website, where we'll have a copy of the PowerPoint available there as well. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you. And then my other question is, typically the university falls with, doesn't fall under the permit requirements for the projects within the city of Reno. Is there a way that this ordinance could be applied to some of the changes that they're making to their landscape up on campus?
Melinda, you're talking about for existing projects underway?
No, not necessarily. It's my understanding that typically the university does not have to apply to the city for building permits.
Correct.
Unless it impacts, the city street or something along that line. Is there a way that the ordinance could be expanded, that there would at least be some kind of a design review or recommendations that could be given to the university that might have some teeth in it with this ordinance?
I think that is a great question. It's not one that I'm able to answer right now. What I think we'll do, I expect that through these workshops, there'll sometimes be questions that we may need to follow up on to provide a good answer or better answer. On what we'll plan on doing is posting for those questions that we're not able to answer in the workshop itself, where we'll post responses to those online. I can tell you that, generally speaking, especially with when you're talking about state properties, that the city's ability to implement its standards on those properties is limited. I think it is a good question, though. Certainly, if that was something that they may wish to do voluntarily, that would, of course, always be encouraged. But let me see if I can get a better answer that we can post online as well. Thank you for that question.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got Kelly, followed by Carrie, followed by Mark.
Hello? Can you hear
We
me?
can hear you. Yes.
We can hear you.
Amazing. So I just have back to the sort of like the city staffing questions with the planting for the relief option. When somebody can't fit the trees onto their side and they need to pick, or they choose to use that option, will that go through the city staff? Will they be planting the trees? Will the person's landscape contractor be required to plant the trees? How's that going to play out? Do we know yet?
So the specifics on, process beyond what's in the code, that has not been detailed out yet, but it would, I believe what we have in the code is that it would need to be done to the satisfaction of the urban forester. And so I think that provides some flexibility and some options to the urban forester in terms of how that is carried out. I don't know, Matt, if there's anything that you would like to add at that.
I'm just thinking like it's a cost to like a developer or a contractor to, if they're gonna, plant a tree on a site where they've already mobilized to, now they have to mobilize to other sites or maybe several sites around town. Like there's an extra added cost in there above and beyond what they would have to do if they could maintain at that one site. It's harder for them and costs more money. So then it costs more money to build whatever. It just, it's just sort of a snowballing thing to have to go to 4 or 5 different sites or even 2 sites when you're putting together a project as a contractor.
That's right. And because of that, I don't anticipate very many people using that option. I think if they, I would anticipate that if the trees cannot be replaced on site, that the Relief Reno Fund would probably be the most, the simplest and, the preference to mitigate the loss of the trees.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we've got Mark is up next. I'm sorry, Carrie. Carrie is up next.
Yeah, thanks. Quick question. You said there was an exemption for defensible space thinning. I was just curious. So if you had you were working with a HOA or a community that was doing some vegetation removal for defensible space, would they need to apply for that exemption? Or would it be inherent that if they are doing it for that purpose, it's assumed they don't need to contact the city?
So in the current draft, it would need to be according to, or it would need to be defensible space work that is occurring under an approved defensible space plan approved by the fire department. And there's also a section in there in terms of, needing to essentially seek that approval, or that the administrator may require additional information to ensure that exemption is applicable. So that is something that, based on the current draft, if work is proposed that may negatively impact private protected trees, then they would need to come in for that landscape permit. And then if they're seeking that exemption to apply, then that certainly is something that should be very clearly noted. But again, I do want to point out that what we're looking at right now is a draft. We fully expect that as we go through this public process and hear from the community, hear from stakeholders, there's going to be opportunities for only improving what you will see in the draft and potentially making changes based on those conversations that we have here. So if there are, I fully encourage all the attendees, as you read through the draft language itself, if you have recommendations, if you have concerns, things that you really like, if you do put that to us in writing as well, in addition to in these workshops, I think that will really help us in the long run, in the end, to have a better product that we can bring forward to our bodies for review.
Great, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Will pass it on to others who work in more defensible space work and see if they have input.
Great, thank you.
And Mark.
Hopefully I'm unmuted. it's actually an interesting follow-up to that, and that is if there is an application for tree removal and it's denied by the city forester, or there's a determination that's in dispute, how I'm reading the new update in section 832 is that it's a appeal to the urban forestry commission, or if they're not able to hear the case, then it goes to an administrative hearing. If an individual doesn't get the relief that they're looking for at that point, then it goes to city council. Whereas if it's a variance, it goes straight to planning commission. What is it? I'm kind of at a loss as to if there's a dispute or a point of contention between, say, the developer wanting to do something and the city forester or other representatives saying, we prefer that you don't do it this way. Do they go to urban forestry commission, or do they go to planning commission, or do they just go straight to city council?
And I think part of that is also going to depend on what exactly is being impacted. You know, chapter 8.32 is specific to public trees. So public trees that are in the public right of way in a public space versus most of the time what you're going to see with Title 18 and looking to update those standards is on private property. So I think the specifics there will be dependent on, you know, if they wish to appeal a decision, who would be appealed to.
Well, let's take Carrie's defensible space plan as an option. Here it's a private homeowners association with a common open space that's managed by the homeowners association, and the powers that be say, well, we really would prefer that you keep those trees, even though it may be something that you desire to remove. We don't think that it's beyond the 30 feet from a habitable structure or whatever they're hanging their hat on. Where does that appeal then go to? Does it go to urban forestry commission, or does it go to planning commission?
That would be under the Title 18 process based on what you've just described. So it would not go to urban forestry.
Okay.
And appeal of an administrative decision. I apologize. I not knowing off the top of my head, and if Brooke's still on the line, he might
code,
be able to speak to this. I think that it may go to the hearing examiner or administrative hearing officer.
Okay.
I'm not positive off the top of my head, but if we're talking about a private space like this, privately owned, it would not go through the Urban Forestry Commission. And it looks like Brooke just went on camera, so he might be able to speak more fully to that piece.
Yeah, the understanding that if it does come through Title 18 and there's a dispute on that, that would be an appeal and would go to, as I'm reading the new code, that would go to city council on that appeal.
As opposed to a variance to planning commission.
If you took a variance, then the variance would go to planning commission. They would make their decision, and that is also appealable to city council.
By anybody, not necessarily the applicant or the staff.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have no one else currently with their hand raised. And Kelly just raised her hand.
Kelly, it looks like you're unmuted, but we're unable to hear you if you're speaking. We're still not hearing anything. It looked like it went from mute to unmute, and it's unmuted again. Did we just lose her?
No, I just took away her permission to talk and give it back. Hopefully that works.
Kelly, do you want to try again? We are not hearing you. So two options. One is if you wanted to dial in real quickly with one of those, the phone number options on the Zoom to hear you that way, or if you wanted to follow up with us by submitting comments or emailing one of us, we can hopefully address your question that way as well. And in the meantime, is there anyone else who has questions in the queue?
Currently, no one else has their hand raised.
And Kelly, it looks like you were trying to unmute again, but we're still not hearing anything. I'm sorry for that, for the technical difficulties. All right, well, she's trying to work that out. One last opportunity for anyone who's got additional questions, input, comments that you'd like to make, please raise your hand now. And otherwise, please do take a look. If you haven't had an opportunity yet to take a look at the actual language, of course, devil's always in the details So please take a look at the draft language that is online. You can see a lot of those specifics of what's being proposed, the enhanced standards, all the different changes that are in there. You will see that in red line form in the draft language posted online at reno.gov/trees. There you can also find an option to subscribe to updates, a list of all of the input opportunities that are coming up, as well as a place where you can submit comments online digitally. Did we
Looks
get
like we
any?
got one last question from Mark.
Perfect.
It wasn't so much a question in that the new code update does mention a standalone landscape plan. You're talking to a lot of landscape architects probably that are online right now. Could you speak to that perhaps? That is there a different track other than like under the BLD permit process, or if I want to submit just a landscape plan?
So you're talking about for landscape permit, like if you're looking to impact protected tree or required landscaping outside of the building permit or grading permit process?
Yes.
Okay, so that is a new permit that we would need to create new process that we would need to establish, procedures and forms and all of that, new workflow in Acela, new, everything associated with that. If that part of the draft language gets adopted, then we would work to put all of that information together and get it out to the community.
That was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other
Another
questions?
hands raised. Let's try Kelly one last time since we do have a little bit of time. Kelly, let's give it a shot one more time. No, doesn't look like we're going to have any luck.
And Kelly, if you want to just email one of us or submit comments through that online form with your follow-up, we'd be happy to get back to you. You should have received when you registered for the webinar, should have received an automated message from me, I think, through Zoom, and it should have my email address on there if you want to reach out to me that way, or one of the other staffers on the call today. All right, so if we do not have any other questions or comments from the group, thank you so much all for your time today. Very much appreciate it. We are having another set of workshops next Thursday, 2 different workshops, one from 3 to 5, another from 5:30 to 7:30. And also we'll be attending next week on Tuesday, the Ward 1 and Ward 5 neighborhood advisory boards. You're welcome to attend those as well. You'll certainly get much of the same information that you received here today, but certainly if you have additional comments that you'd like to ask in that open forum, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for your time today, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your Thursday afternoon.
Hey, Kelly, real quick, Carrie, did you have a question? I saw you put your hand up for a second.
I just wanted to say thank you all for your hard work. It's really nice to see that the city is putting priority into these updates.
Thank you. Thank you so much for participating. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Bye again. Have a great Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kelly. Have a great night.
Thank you, you too. Thanks for helping us out.